can use these techniques to convince a person that they have supernatural powers, that they have a spiritual power from heaven. Now, if they're using it for good or entertainment, that's fine. But people who use it to control people, to manipulate people, to get them to do evil things, that's where we get the movements of cults. We know from studies that terrorist groups have studied. Where did they get their manuals? They studied, in terms of brainwashing, these cult brainwashing techniques. And they use it in their recruitment and in their phobias to keep people into the groups. So there is this connection of persuasion that goes everywhere. Sometimes we're persuaded by people that are selling Coca-Cola or cigarettes. And they put an ad up in America for cigarettes. On the bottom there's a little picture and it says, warning, Surgeon General warning, smoking this product will kill you. It'll give you emphysema. Now what picture do they put up on the billboard? They don't put an old person in a wheelchair with an oxygen mask. They give a healthy cowboy riding off into the sunset in Wyoming. We have a cowboy here, right? He's riding off into the sunset because they want you to disassociate. So this is what cults do. And unfortunately, this is what has happened with not only cults, but with the Messianic movement. And I'll end with this. When Jews for Jesus, for example, makes a flyer that looks like this one, that says Jews should not believe in Jesus, using the word Jews in the center of a star, what does that remind you of? It reminds you of the Holocaust. It's not an accident. And when it says Jews should not believe in Jesus, because they want you to pick up the literature. If it said Jews should believe in Jesus and have a cross, up on their, front porch, you're not going to pick up the literature by making it look Jewish. By mistranslating and taking out of context dozens of Bible passages and passages from the Talmud, passages from the Kabbalah. I'll never forget when I challenged the Messianics once. I said, I will give you $100,000 if you can show me where the quote is in the Zohar that you have in your pamphlet that says that the reason God's name is 3 times in the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, because it represents God the Father, God the Son, and God of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And I said, I'll give you $100,000 if you find that in the Zohar, because it doesn't exist. And I guarantee you 99% of the Messianic Jews have accepted and believed that and never looked for it and don't realize that it doesn't exist and it was a total fabrication. People are being manipulated. And the purpose of our organization and the purpose of having Penina here in Yerushalayim and in all of Israel, and having the help of many of you, because I hope that many of you will come forward and not only volunteer your time, but help us. And this was not meant, she won't make an appeal, but I will tell you, I came here primarily to speak and to meet with some other people to help get the funding to make this a reality. And we hope that any of you that are in a position to help us will. But that's all we're going to say about that. But more so, we need to help the Jews out there. We need to be the one that tells them, this is our faith, this is our religion, this is our diamond. And although a diamond, when you take it out of the ground, may not look so beautiful, because it needs to be polished and cleaned up, it takes a little bit of work and we can make it shine. And together, that's what Jews for Judaism has been doing for over 25 years. All of us that have been involved over this period, we've worked to save people. And that's what we're dedicated to. We've given up many other things in our life to do that. And we're very happy that we're launching this. And I'm very, very honored and happy that Penina is part of this. Thank you. We're going to take questions. We have one more part.
Morphs into the word Jesus from a distance on that guy. Let's see.
Kravitz, thank you. For the ladies and gentlemen, please, for the last talk this evening, we're going to actually hear from both sides tonight. We're going to hear from Kravitz and Penina. We're going to discuss really the current and the local issue, the issues surrounding us in Yerushalayim and in Israel, and just they're going to just give us a little bit of background information regarding what is actually happening over here. So please, for the last time tonight, Kravitz and Penina.
I would just like to say one thing, because I know that in some places where I speak, people do get offended by us mentioning the name of Jesus. But I want to tell you, when I was in South Africa the second time for my lecture tour, my last speech after about 20 of them was before all of the Orthodox rabbis of the community. And it's a custom to say a milsa de vedichasa, which is kind of a lighthearted kind of Dvar Torah that livens people up. So I told them the following thing, that when people ask about saying the name of Jesus, where are you allowed to say it or not? So actually, if you look in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Avodah Zarah, in the laws of idolatry, where it talks about mentioning the names of other gods, in the Bir HaGra, the Vilna Gaon, he says the following. He says, Mutu loyma shem shal ozto ha'ish. It is permissible to say the name of the guy whose name I won't mention. But it is permissible, but he preferred not to. So I said to the rabbis, I don't know what's more funny, that the Vilna Gaon said that you could say the name of this guy, but he wouldn't say it, or a Chabad guy's up here quoting the Vilna Gaon. So everybody got a good laugh out of that. So I must tell you that if I saying it, I offended anyone, it's only for the purpose of education. It is not for the purpose of worship in any way. Okay? So now I'm going to turn it over to Penny. I'm going to start? Okay. I'm glad you know what I was supposed to talk about. Jews for Judaism recognized a changing trend in proselytizing. 2 years ago, with the funding of the Los Angeles Jewish Community Foundation, we received a very large grant to do a strategic plan. It took a lot of time, but the first step in a strategic plan is research. You need to see what the trends are, what's going on out there. And we started noticing that a lot of people thought the missionary problem had disappeared, primarily because they didn't see missionaries standing on street corners wearing Jews for Jesus t-shirts, handing out flyers. So they said they must have gone away. But we knew it wasn't true, because we were the ones getting dozens of phone calls every month, or even more. We knew it wasn't. So what was happening? So when we started doing our research, we realized a couple of different things happened. Evangelical Christians, many of them, were training young college and high school students in something called peer proselytizing, or friendship proselytizing, where they would train these young people to go to their friends and talk to them. And they were also adapting the model of the Messianic Jews for Jesus groups and telling them they could be Jewish and Christian simultaneously. So it was much more going on behind the scenes. That's why people weren't seeing it. In the same way that the Moonies don't stand on the street corners handing out flowers, selling flowers, but they bought the Washington Times and they own that newspaper. And that's how they get their message out. And they have conferences because of the influence of owning that newspaper. They've changed their model. The same way advertisers change their model from when they can't have commercials anymore because people get rid of them with this machine called TiVo, so they do placement advertising. So things have changed. We started seeing that the phenomenon of how proselytizing is changing is not only happening in America, but all over the world. We also saw it here in Eretz Yisrael. We knew from Jews for Judaism, there's lots of proselytizing going on. We're getting the phone calls. We're getting the emails. I cannot tell you how many emails I get from Israeli families telling me it's happened to a relative of theirs. So why are we have so many people say it doesn't exist? It doesn't exist. Well, primarily because there are many evangelical Christians who are true friends of Israel, who are helping us financially and politically. Some of them have no hidden agenda. They're very clear about what they want to do and help Israel. Some do have a hidden agenda. You can never really know. But I can tell you, when the battle for Gush Katif was going on, and someone came to our synagogue in LA to raise money, and I can proudly say that our synagogue gave over $18,000. I can tell you that the person that came from Gush Katif told us, and he said, Rabbi, I just heard what you do. I have to tell you, a group of Christians came to Gush Katif to give our support, and they had Israeli security guards protecting them. And one of the security guards came up to me and he said, Tagid li mazal tov. Lama? Hayom yom holedet sheli. Today is my birthday. So he said, Ben kamata? How old are you? He said, Ani ben shalosh. I'm 3. He looked at him, what do you mean? Yes, I'm 3 because I was born again 3 years ago. This is an Israeli. So I don't care if it's 1 Jew or 1,000,000 that we lose. It doesn't matter. And if it's your child, it won't matter either. So Jews for Judaism's foundational belief has always been, the statement in the Talmud Sanhedrin, whoever saves a single life is as if they saved an entire world. But the Talmud continues, whoever destroys a single life is as if they destroyed an entire world. The loss of even one Jew to our Jewish heritage and to our faith is too much for us. And that's why we are dedicated, and that's why we needed to do something different and use the proven techniques that Jews for Judaism has across the world and our unique approach to bring it here and to try to help out in the best way that we can to spread our message and to keep Jews Jewish.
Okay, I'm going to try my hand at a joke. I'm not good at telling jokes. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. If you found something that I said funny, it was an accident. I didn't do it on purpose. So a rabbi, a Knesset member, and a missionary walk into a room. Sounds like a joke, doesn't it? Well, it's not. It's happening in Israel now, and it's not funny. In fact, it's downright scary. I'm going to give you some excerpts from a talk that I gave when I was in Baltimore called Enemy Mine. I chose the title just very briefly from a movie that had to do with an earthling and an other planet-ing, I don't know what you would call them. An alien, thank you. An earthling and an alien who are enemies, and they find themselves on this third planet, and the people of that third planet are their enemies, and they have to work together in order to survive so that they can each go home and one day probably kill each other. But according to the write-up on the movie, it's a beautiful concept, and there's somebody who thinks that it is, and I don't agree with him. About a year ago, a man named Michael Steinhardt wrote an article which was published in the Jerusalem Post online edition. Michael Steinhardt, for those of you who don't know, is the co-founder of Birthright International. And he wrote an article entitled, "We Desperately Need Friends." And in the article, he goes through and basically totally rails against people like us who say, well, as he put it, in the end, we have even become suspicious of evangelical support for Israel, in the belief that they have a hidden religious agenda, and he's so surprised that intelligent people would have a problem with this. How can we treat our friends this way? He says that if this isn't friendship, we would have a hard time defining what is. Are we to refuse these acts of loving kindness from evangelicals merely because we disagree with their religious beliefs? What would that say about us as a people? Now, in a way, what he said is right, and what Rabbi Kravitz said is right, although I would disagree with him on probably percentages. But there are some Christian evangelical organizations whose main purpose is simply to help Jews in Israel, to help Jews get to Israel. However, unfortunately, maybe I've become jaded, my opinion is that they are few and far between. And what's worse is there's a whole group of evangelical organizations out there, organizations that we can't pin anything on, organizations who do not put anything in their literature about evangelizing Jews, although if you read it and you know what you're looking for, you know that they promote it. However, organizations like, for example, and I'm going to name one, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, who does absolutely nothing in their literature to promote the evangelizing of Jewish people in Israel, yet brings over hundreds and hundreds of evangelical volunteers every year who come here, and what do while they are here? They evangelize. If you don't believe me, I can show you. I have email after email after email of people who are not just evangelized by these tourists who they've caught at a restaurant or on a bus, but by the permanent workers who are here, who are in their ulpans learning the language. I was in an ulpan, there were 27 students in this ulpan. Of the 27 students, 3 of them were outward, obvious Christian missionaries, okay? Who knows how many others might have been in there who were keeping their mouths shut. But 3 of them, that's more than 10%. Other people I know say that more than half of their ulpan class was filled with missionaries. Anyway, one of the problems is that we are bringing people into the community who are befriending us, they're learning the language, and they are missionizing us on this friendship level. But we also have another problem. And that is revealed in an article which was in the April-May 2006 edition of the Messianic Times. Messianic Times is a Hebrew Christian newspaper. And the article was entitled, get this, UMJC strikes up dialogue with Knesset. Leaders get the ear of the MKs on religious freedom. Okay, the article was written by Leo Holman and Rebecca Colfer. I'm going to spare you all of the details. But the point of the article is that because of these other groups who do have a hidden agenda, not the ones, the few, who are saying, you know, we love Israel, we're giving to Israel because we support Israel. But these other ones have an agenda, and especially the Hebrew Christian organizations such as the UMJC and the MJAA. The agenda is, and they've said it themselves, in order to get equal rights for Aliyah, for Messianic Jews, to get a political presence within the Knesset so that they can change the laws. Now, one of the things that Rabbi Kravitz said was that so many people don't think that there's a problem in Israel. One of the biggest things that I get is people saying to me, but isn't it illegal to proselytize in Israel? Now, I'm curious, how many of you here thought, before you spoke to me, that it was illegal to proselytize in Israel? Okay, not quite half. You would not believe how many people think that. And when I tell them that it has been legal to proselytize in Israel for over 25 years, they're shocked. Anti-missionary legislation was down sometime in the early 80s, I believe 1982. And every time that it has been attempted, there has been an attempt to bring it back. The evangelical Christian groups that support our country have exercised their political power and managed to get those who are in the government to keep us from passing these laws. It is only illegal to proselytize in this country if you're doing it with enticement. In other words, a bribe. They do it anyway. I had a volunteer who went to Bridges for Peace, for example. It's also illegal to proselytize minors, yes. That is for an adult to proselytize a minor. Someone said the army, however, I would like to read something to you. Something that I think you will find scary. This was from an organization called Tents of Mercy, which operates here in Israel. They have a newsletter called Oasis. This is from a year ago. And one of their leaders writes, one of my children is an 18-year-old combat soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. He came home on leave with the following story. During a long night of guard duty, he and another soldier got into a philosophical discussion about God, creation, and the Messiah. They teased each other back and forth about evolution versus creation. But when my son spoke clearly of his faith in Yeshua, his companion asked, "Tell me about this Yeshua again?" In the end, his friend said, "Hey, I want to follow your Yeshua. Make me a Messianic too." Had we not arrived in Israel some 14 years ago, enabling Avi to grow up here, knowing Hebrew as if it were his native language, the above conversation would never have happened. The generation of our children, those who have attended school in Israel and become part of the fabric of society, they are the harvest workers who will bring this nation to God in unprecedented numbers. Now, if that isn't scary in and of itself, I don't know what is. Yes, please.
I just want to interject one point. Even for those of you that may think we're perhaps overly harsh toward the evangelical church and Christians who are helpful to Israel, I can understand where you're coming from. But let's put them even aside. You have a Jews for Jesus Center with 8 families, many of whom, the majority of whom are Israelis who have converted to Christianity, who are working here. You have Chosen People Ministries with a 3,500 square foot building here in Jerusalem, a Messianic Center. You have the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, and if you look on the cover of our newsletter from Toronto, it is shocking to see that in the parade, the Jerusalem Day Parade, they not only marched in the parade, which I could understand and realize to be all-inclusive, but to have them lead the parade. And when you watch the video and you see the Israelis waving to them and being totally unaware of that these people have an agenda to share their belief in Jesus in the name, calling him Yeshua, it's mind-boggling. These are just the tips of an iceberg. So we, are basing our opinion about the seriousness on years of research. We delve beyond the surface. We see beyond the tip of the iceberg and know what's going on. And we have a growing problem in the fact that there is this dichotomy in Israeli society of people who are very committed to Judaism and Jewish values and spirituality, and a large percentage that don't feel that that's an important issue at all. And part of Jews for Judaism isn't simply dissuading people from being Christian or a Mooney, but to inspire people to be excited about their Judaism. And I'm sure there are people in this room that could raise their hand and say they were touched in some way by the work that we did. Even I know that there's, if you don't mind, there's a couple here whose son was a famous singer, got involved in Christianity. We helped him, and through him, his whole family got involved in Judaism. You want to raise your hands? Right here. My friends Judy and But it's about getting people to feel that spark of Judaism, keeping Jews. It's not about simply keeping Jews away from missionaries, but it's inspiring them. So that's part of our mission, to inspire people. So that, you can't deny, is important in Israel. So wherever you fall in the spectrum of concern over this, there's a need and there's a purpose for us, and we definitely are going to move forward. I just had to throw that in.
Thank you, Rabbi Kravitz. All right. So one of the things that I think I've been asked a lot of times, so what's the problem? Why is it an issue? So what? When we were at the Sukkot parade handing out literature, and we went there, by the way, we created two pieces of literature, one which we translated into Hebrew. The first piece of literature that we created was called Look Before You Leap. In Hebrew, it's Think Before You Jump. But what it basically said was, you are a Jew, and you have a very precious faith. When you are looking for a spiritual connection, and that's something very important to understand, is that Jewish people who convert to Judaism, to some form of Christianity, they're spiritual people. They're not crazy people. A lot of Jews think that these are people who really have something wrong with them, and that's why they go off. I'll tell you that 99% of the Jewish people who convert don't convert because they're convinced of a proof, but because of somebody they meet or something they see. But ultimately, these are spiritual people who are looking for a spiritual connection. And for whatever reason, they didn't realize that they could have this connection within Judaism. It may be because of the form of Judaism they were shown. It may be for, a number of different reasons. But what happens is when they are looking for a spiritual connection, they discover these people who know how to be kind, who are joyful, who really love God and really enjoy worshiping God. And the leaflet that I wrote said, look to your faith first before looking outside your faith. Because what a shame it would be for you to spend your entire life looking for something you had all along. Now, one of the things that we do at Jews for Judaism is we explain why Messianic Judaism, which is in essence Christianity, and I'm sorry if somebody takes offense at that, but if you take the statement of faith of the UMJC or the MJAA, you lay it next side by side with the statement of faith of Jews for Jesus, and you lay it side by side with the statement of faith of Campus Crusade for Christ, which is kind of a pan-denominational, generic evangelical Christian organization, you will find that the wording is virtually the same. We did this in my class. We put them side by side and people were shocked that people who are calling themselves Messianic Jews are Christians. Now, there are some other groups and people who say, well, I don't believe that, whatever. But the truth is that they are Christians, and this is not Judaism. It's not that faith. So what happened was one day last spring, I went to New York to do a training session for the Jewish Agency, to train their shaliachs on how to recognize people who are deceptively trying to make aliyah, because there are quite a number of them. In fact, that is part of the reason that we now have nearly 20,000 Israelis who believe in Jesus and are halachically Jewish. Okay? When I first joined Jews for Judaism 3 years ago, the number that was going around was that there were 100 Hebrew Christian congregations of some form in this country. Now the number is between 130 and 140. okay? In just 3 years, it's grown that much. All right. So I was in New York and I was training these shaliachs what to look for. And one of the things that, well, I'll talk in a second about that. One of the shaliachs, who was an Israeli, who was a non-observant Israeli, said, so what's the problem? Now, I anticipated this question, because coming from his perspective, if you're going to stop someone from being a citizen based on their beliefs, then who's to say we couldn't kick him out of the country for his beliefs, which are different from, say, my beliefs, or Shas, or whoever, okay? He had a valid concern. And I explained to him that part of the problem is that evangelical, and I'm saying evangelical, so don't hear what I'm not saying, evangelical Christianity, part of the belief system is that you must tell others about your faith. You must bring them to a belief in Jesus. That's what the word evangelical means. It means missionary. It means spreading the good news. Okay? I said, if these people were simply saying, hey, we believe something different, leave us alone and let us be, there may be room for us to say, okay, fine, you're Meshugana, but whatever you want to believe is fine. But the problem is, they don't. They go out and they try to find people, and it's their raison d'etre. It's their reason for being. And so they do it, and they will not stop until they have accomplished their goal. Did you want to say something?
I would just add, our obligation, it's interesting, I'm sure we all learn, and we love to learn Torah. It's always good to have a Devar Torah sometime. I gave a little joke before. I'm sure it'll be repeated this Shabbos by someone. But there's an interesting Rashi. There's a pasuk in Sefer Devarim that says, when the Jews were about to enter into the land of Israel, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu warns the Jewish people, Lo lilmod la'asot, you should not learn to do the abominations of the nations that are there. And Rashi, based on a Gemara, says a very interesting thing. He says, why does it say Lo lilmod la'asot, don't learn to do? It could simply say, don't learn. Or it could have said, don't do. So the Gemara explains, and Rashi brings it down and says that it's teaching us that to learn the ways of the foreign people, the ways that are abomination to us, to do it, that's absolutely forbidden. But to learn it so that you can teach your children, so they won't be influenced, that's permissible. See the difference? So we have an obligation to educate ourselves and Jewish people so that they're not influenced and taken advantage of. We have an obligation that when we see manipulation and deception, when it doesn't happen, to make that stand out. But there's both sides of the coin that we're obligated to do. It says, I have two favorite sayings. One's Latin and one's Aramaic. The Latin one you may have heard. It says, caveat emptor. For those that don't know what it means, buyer beware. Well, that's about the brothers and sisters, and inspiring them, inviting them to our homes for Shabbat, then we're doing something wrong. So it has to be a combination of both issues. And I really think that that's our message to you. We are going to do that here. This is our 6th international office. We now have 15 full-time employees with Jews for Judaism worldwide. We've also simultaneously opened up an office in Sydney, Australia. We have an office in Johannesburg, we have the LA office, we have the Toronto office, and we have the Baltimore office. And those 6 offices become the core of Jews for Judaism, plus our websites. We have more than one. We're working now on a new one for youth, special for college and high school students. And these are all resources that we are bringing now to Eretz Yisrael to help keep Jews Jewish.
All right, so before I open the questions, I'm just going to make one more statement about my vision, which other than obviously setting up an office here in Jerusalem where people can come for counseling. And one of the things that I've noticed, and one of the goals that I have, is to hire a social worker Because one of the problems that we have is that people don't realize that there are Jewish resources that they can access. And so they're going to these evangelical aid societies and organizations and things like that, and along with their aid, they're getting the gospel, and it's happening. And so we're hoping to establish, to have a social worker who can help, especially some of the only immigrant population that just needs some guidance in where to go. We're trying to develop curriculum for seekers and for others, and one of the most poignant things is, going back to the comment about the IDF, is I want to take the model of the JTTV Live, which Baltimore and California have established, which is basically a youth group, and I want to bring it to Israel, and I want to get Israeli youth speaking to their schools, their peers, and talking to them about the issues and preparing their friends and their peers for entry into the IDF. Because nothing is more, nothing works better at evangelism, at spreading your word, than, for example, when you see, you've got two guys who are sitting guard duty or who are being shot out in the field, and the one guy is at peace and the other guy is sweating bullets. And, okay, that was an attempt at humor, it didn't work. Okay, and he says to him, how can you keep so calm? I don't understand. And instead of the guy saying, because I have faith, bitachon, in Hashem, he says, because I have faith in the Messiah, Jesus, Yeshua. Let me tell you about him. And the guy says, wow, well, if it's having this much of an effect on your life, maybe I should listen. This is part of the manipulation process. But I want to prepare these young men and women for what they'll see when they go in. So anyway, those are some of the projects that we've got on our agenda. We've got a lot of ideas. We've got a lot of people who are willing to volunteer, and I hope that some of you will get to see your faces in our office once we get it. All right. That was my appeal for money.
We're going to take questions,
Yes.
but we have to have a certain protocol. The protocol is that because we have limited time, and because you have a unique opportunity to have two individuals that I'm speaking about, Penina, experts in this, please only ask a question and keep it short. This is not the time for people to stand up and give speeches. We will have open forums at another time where people can come, we'll do focus groups, think tanks, and you can share when you get more involved. But tonight is not for that. You have a specific question that you need one of us to answer, please ask your question. We'll be happy to try to answer it. But if it becomes a speech, we're going to ask you to stop, even if it's my wife, I don't know, or my father-in-law, or any relative. I'm just saying that to be polite to all of you. We just have to keep it to questions. Okay? We're starting in the back of the room. Okay? And since you probably won't be able to hear it, I'm going to try to repeat. Yes?
Thank you, Rabbi. This is essentially a lucky question. What would you say to someone like me who was many, many years involved in Christianity? Baruch Hashem, I was born Jewish. And now there's a Torah obligation of Hakiras Tov. What would you say about an obligation incumbent upon me to be involved in counter-missionary work, utilising the experience that I have many years, learning the New Testament and all the rest?
So let me understand. You were saying that you were born Jewish, you were involved in Christianity, have returned back to Judaism.
Yes.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
Welcome home.
I went to Yeshiva 15 years ago.
Okay, so this isn't as simple a question as people might think, because you might say, oh, everybody should be involved in this. This is a rabbinic question that people have to realize that not everybody can just simply go into dealing with, even though they've gone through that experience and coming and dealing with Christian texts again and helping people. It's a question for a Rav to ask if I should be involved. 2, it's a question about whether or not being exposed to that over and over again might have negative influence on the person. And second of all, it's about training and methodology. Because it's easy to say things about it. There's another thing about how to say in a way that even if you don't convince a person, you've left them with a positive feeling of love. because that is the Avos Yisrael that we can always share. So I think I'd be happy. You can meet with me, or send me an email. My email is on the literature, and I'd be happy to explore this more deeply with you. But I think that's an individual thing that we should do and not give a general answer to everyone. Okay?
My name is Abe Weintraub, and I was born and raised in Baltimore, all along Park Heights Avenue. Lower Park Heights to Upper Park Heights. But what I'm really surprised, I've been here 47 years already, and what I'm really surprised, on every trip we used to go with my wife, on every bar mitzvah, wedding, and everything from my brother and my brother and sister's children and grandchildren, that a lot of my friends, their children have married non-Jews. That the amount of assimilation that's going on is startling, as when we grew up there in Baltimore, as you compare to what it is now. And it's not just they're marrying Christians or anything like that. They're marrying a lot of secular people, and a lot of these, the amount of assimilation is incredible that I can see.
That's good.
Your question?
Okay.
The question is, do you do anything to...
In fact, we created an additional program that used to do called 2 Roads, 1 Path, to reach out to intermarried couples, to try to get them, especially the Jewish spouse, to start exploring their Jewish identity. And even without a budget to advertise that website, we get thousands and thousands of visits to that website and emails from people. And I can tell you, I was at a wedding, it's very interesting, I have to tell you, a couple that I met who became Messianic Jews, both the husband and wife. Their daughter was a Messianic Jew. They came back to Judaism. The daughter just got married in an Orthodox wedding. And at that wedding, someone came up to me and said, I'm here because my brother-in-law influenced me to become more religious. Who's his brother-in-law? Someone that went to our website who was married to a non-Jew, got inspired through the website, left his non-Jewish wife, got more involved in Judaism, influenced his brother-in-law. So there is something we can do, but it has to come one step at a time. And we each have to try. We're each part of a puzzle. Okay?
Yeah.
Question?
Question. Do you know for a fact, I personally do, that some of missionary groups give actually mind drugs and or say vitamin P for the method who can be more specific, David Deutsch from Berkeley?
Okay. I don't personally know about this, and I think this, but that's something I think at another time we'll delve into that possibility.
That's what I mean.
Okay. Yes.
Good evening. I'm going to surprise you, Rabbi Kravi. My name is Mina Fenton.
Yes, I'm going to interrupt you. This is the Honorable Mina Fenton, Pastor.
I'm doing something that he ordered us not to do, but I want to bless you. I think I was overwhelmed to listen to you. What you have accumulated here, I can tell you, the dear audience, really a big audience here, is for more than a year of lectures and of more than a year of details and information. The Christian Embassy has conversion in their list. The Christian Embassy supports Hands of Mercy. And I can tell you terrible stories which I took part and saved 2 families from their names. So number one, I want to bless you. It's such a great need. You came to Israel when there is already a storm of Christian organizations. There is what we call the money crusade. And I wanted to raise, I don't want to keep on talking.
You want to raise money for us?
Thank you. 3 questions. As there is a storm now, and we take a fellowship for Christian and Jews, Bridges for Peace, and I can name 20 organizations, I can tell you clearly proselytizing. And they say they don't hide it. They don't hide it. How are we going now? Have you got on your agenda? And again, it's very important to the public. I'm not only for me, to the public. As there is such a big storm, how are we unveiling the truth? You see, we come to people, they tell us, but we didn't know. Who is going to tell us? Now the papers don't want to publish. The television don't want to say a word about it because all of them are touched and get money. So this is a target. I don't know whether you took it into consideration. You mentioned
Let me answer that question first.
Okay.
And I'm sure, I don't know if you all heard, Nina, you are a member of
City
the
Council.
City Council of the holiest city in the world. Okay? And a crusader in the Jewish sense for Judaism. On that issue, I think you're right, and the strategic planning process that we've done in the past with our organization, that really major multi-million or billion-dollar companies use this technique to figure out the best way to approach a problem, is something that we're going to be doing to analyze this unique problem and how best to reach the public. For the next 2 days, our representatives are going to be meeting nonstop, in contact with our representatives who were not able to come here, to think through the problems, the unique challenges, as you've mentioned. There's something in the LAPD, I don't know if you know, and I just have to introduce one of the board members of Jews for Judaism in Los Angeles, Bennett Simon, who just purchased a home here in Yerushalayim, and he owns a security company called SWAT. And SWAT is SWAT, but in business it's SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You analyze all of these things. So we need to analyze the challenge of communicating it to the public, dealing with the media, how to best use our resources to have a good return on investment. And these are all things we are taking into consideration. We're starting the process, and we hope that in a short time we will have at least some first target steps that we can do that have been thought out. Okay? So that's the answer to the first question. Penny, you want to add anything to that?
I do, but I don't until after we've talked.
Okay. Okay.
No, you had two more questions?
Let's let someone else ask another question. Yes.
I also did Christianity.
Okay, could you stand up so we can hear you, if you don't mind?
I also did Tshuva to Christianity like her.
Welcome.
So, how can a person don't understand that Christianity isn't a path to Judaism, for Jew?
How should we teach them, or how is it possible that a person
How can a person like a Jew that went through Christianity and find Judaism through Christianity doesn't understand that Christianity is also one path that you are going to find Judaism?
Okay, there's a couple of different views on this. The question had to do with, for example, I shared that people have asked me, you came back to Judaism. First of all, you had a miracle happen when you became a Christian. But I had David Klinghoffer, is that his first name, David Klinghoffer? Did an article, he interviewed me, and actually I didn't have an opportunity to write a response, which I wish I had. In this article that he wrote, he quoted me, and he quoted my story, and how Messianic Judaism was a stepping stone for me back to Judaism. However, it is also a stepping stone for Jews to Christianity, to what I consider, and many consider, idolatry. And it is certainly not Judaism. So, on the one hand, God can use any path He needs to use, but that does not make it okay. It does not make it His, to borrow a phrase from Christianity, His perfect will. It's not what He wants for us, but we're there. So He takes us where we're at, and then He moves us along to where He wants us to be. There are people who have come back to Judaism through all kinds of cults, from being married to somebody who isn't a Jew, but who discovered something and encouraged them to discover their Judaism. So, the bottom line is that God uses whatever He has to use in our life when we are willing to open our eyes and to look for the truth. And that really is the bottom line.
Yes.
I have a question about the Russian population here. On the one hand, they are given rights as equal citizens of Israel through the law of return. They're not considered Jews, but there are 1 million of them, not out there, but right here and around us. They're not halachically Jewish, but many of them would like to be. They know very little because of the era of the communist period. They were not given any Jewish education. They're not halachically Jewish, however. Do we have any responsibility toward them to bring them back? Or they're not missionizing us, but do we have any responsibility toward them?
That's a great question. And I think we do have an obligation. Because as Jews, we have an obligation to help every person. It's just a question of what help we should be giving them. So we have to analyze what we should be doing. Sometimes, I've had in California, Catholic families who've come to me and said, would you help us with our daughter who's become an evangelical? Now it's strange, here's a rabbi, why would I want to tell their daughter not to be a Christian? So in that case, I'm not focusing when I meet with their daughter on the theological beliefs, but on have you been manipulated? Have you been brainwashed? Have you been deceived? Are you making an informed choice? And if we could help someone to avoid becoming a missionary who will then target a Jew, then we're definitely doing a service for Judaism. So I think we do have an obligation. The question is we have to analyze in each case what is the obligation, because you're talking about anytime you have a large group like that who could potentially become part of the Christian movement to proselytize those people that are Jewish, what's the best way to influence them? So that's part of strategic planning, to figure out, look at that problem, say it is a problem, but what's going to work and what's the best way to do it? And I think that's one of the things that makes our organization stand out. There are other organizations that do work in dealing with cults and missionaries, and all the honor to them for the things that they do. But I think each one of us has a unique approach. Our approach has worked for us. Their approach has worked for them. We're not here to take away from their approach. They're welcome to do it. But we have something that I don't think has been fully introduced into Israel that has worked all across. It's not an accident that our most popular booklet, The Jewish Response to Missionaries, now has 320,000 copies in 7 languages. We didn't just go out and decide we'll translate it to 7. We had people from all these different countries come to us and say, we want to use this book. So we've been dealing with this problem worldwide. So I think that's the unique contribution that we are going to bring to Eretz Yisrael, and we'll deal with that.
I think I just want to add real quickly before we take another question. One of the other things that is also unique about Jews for Judaism, I think, I could be wrong, when I worked at Jews for Judaism in Baltimore as a peon, I took quite a lot of phone calls from people, not just Jewish families who were concerned about their child who now is embracing Christianity or who is intermarrying or who is going off into some kind of a cult, which I did take quite a lot of those. I also answered quite a lot of questions from sincere, honest Christians who were realizing that there was a problem with what they believed and they didn't know where else they could get answers to their questions. I wasn't proselytizing them, I was just answering their questions. But when they wanted to know about this verse or they wanted to know about why we don't see this verse this way, I answered it for them. And we also took phone calls. I got a phone call from a Christian man whose son decided he wanted to convert to Judaism. Now, obviously, he wanted me to help him convert to Judaism, and I had to refer him to a rabbi. But we take calls from everybody and anybody, because the things that we are teaching, as Mark Powers was wont to say, if it's not there, I can't make it appear. And if it's there, I can't make it disappear. We're not teaching anything that's secret. We're not hiding anything. We're not twisting anything. What we're teaching is the truth. And so when people come to us and they ask us questions, we answer the questions honestly. It doesn't matter what their background is. So that's one more.
Just one other point. That we have another unique contribution that I'm very proud of. One of our slogans throughout the 25 years we've been in existence is uniting the Jewish community in a common cause. There are very few organizations where all of the directors come from an Orthodox perspective, who are invited into Reform and conservative synagogues to speak to their children. And I don't know of many groups, and I know that there are many Kiruv groups that come to me and say, we're really envious that you're able to do that. And the reason is because we go in a non-judgmental way. We just want to share the ideas of critical thinking, opportunities to learn, and to be aware of the threat. And I think that is something that is desperately needed in a country where there is such a schism between religious and non-religious, an organization that comes with a reputation of being able to breach that barrier. And I would be remiss if I didn't use this as an opportunity to at least, if you'll indulge me for 30 seconds, in a 30-second recap, to just point out some of the major differences between Judaism and Christianity, because I'm sure that there may be some people who've come here tonight who are Christian or Messianic, and I'm glad that you came, and I'd be happy to meet with you privately and keep it confidential. But I have to say, the essential differences of Judaism go back many years ago. And I can tell you that the original followers of Jesus, who were called Evionim, and if you look it up on Wikipedia or on the internet, you'll find out they were people that originally thought that Jesus was simply the Messiah, and they kept the Torah. When Constantine influenced the world to accept a different form of Christianity that deified Jesus, introduced the Trinity, everything changed. And I think the biggest difference between Judaism and Christianity is that our understanding of the absolute, uncompromising unity of God in His essence is not compatible with a belief in a Trinity. It is not in the Zohar. And the idea that God should be incarnate in a body is no different than the people who lived before Abraham. We all, whether Messianic or not, we all agree. Abraham was the great innovator for the world in Judaism. Before Abraham stood up and said there's one God, people were worshiping trees, cockroaches, anything imaginable. And what did he come? He said, that's not God. God is something that transcends all of these finite limitations. So, unanimously, Judaism has said that this belief is idolatrous for Jews. There are many rabbinical authorities that say that perhaps for a non-Jew it's not idolatry, although it is not the truth. The Ramah among them. And that's one major difference. The second difference is the abrogation of the commandments. Yes, Messianic Jews may practice different things, but to believe that this is our spiritual connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is not the way Christianity or Messianic Jews see it. And you should know that the word mitzvah is probably one of the most well-known words to American Jews. Oh, do a mitzvah today. But when you ask what does the word mitzvah mean, 99% will say a good deed. And it doesn't mean that. Mitzvah literally means a commandment. In order to be a commandment, there had to be someone who commanded it. But the Hebrew word mitzvah actually comes from an ancient Semitic root, tzavta, which means to join and connect. In modern Israeli Hebrew, we have the word sevet, a group, a team, and they have to work together. A mitzvah joins us to God. It's a spiritual connection. We never will do away with that. The third point is we believe that our relationship to God is very personal. I can't tell you how many Christians have told me, Rabbi, the two most popular questions I get from Christians, Rabbi, who do you think Jesus was? And second of all, do you have a personal relationship with God? And I do. And when I was privileged to save that young girl's life, and I stood there in the road near Tel Aviv, and there was an Israeli from the north, near Haifa, who helped me to do CPR. And he was not religious. He used the word that I find personally offensive, chiloni, from the word chol, which means a vacuum. I don't like that word. He said, I'm chiloni. I wasn't meant to be here. I said, if you weren't meant to be here, I'm 8,000 miles from home. I was supposed to be. He said, how do you explain that? So I said, David HaMelech said, May Hashem mitzadegeva kononu, the footsteps of men are established by God. God directs our path. It's not an accident. Why this happened, I can't explain. But that we were sent here to act upon it in the right way, that for sure God wanted us to do. And I can tell you that I will never, if someone wants to ever eulogizes me, I should live to be 120. I hope that they'll tell me and remind how that Chiloni Israeli and I embraced and hugged in the middle of the road and cried together, realizing that was not an accident. So we do have a personal relationship with God. And last but not least, our salvation, so to speak, comes through this direct connection. And we can pray to God, we do teshuvah. Missionaries are always want to say, well, I don't know if you heard this, you don't have a temple anymore, so you can't bring sacrifices to get rid of your sins, so you're stuck, catch 22. You know what? When Jonah went to Nineveh, and the whole city was going to be destroyed for their sins, it says they prayed out to God, and they fasted, and they were forgiven, and they didn't offer one sacrifice. And when Hosea said, offer your prayers instead of sacrifices, Jews were forgiven, because the essence of repentance and getting back to God is not the sacrifice, it's the changing of your heart. And the sacrifice was a tool that God gave us to help us reach that level of feeling of remorse and repentance. And I always ask evangelicals, if you brought 10,000 sacrifices, perfectly unblemished, but you didn't have any regret for the sin you did, do you think God would forgive you? I've never met a Christian that said yes. Because it's the act, it's the changing of our heart. So all of the answers are within Judaism. They're there for us. But I will challenge you to one thing as we close the evening. This is a monumental task. And the only reason Jews for Judaism has been so successful is we didn't do it alone. We try to empower every person that talks to us, that hears us, that you should take it upon yourself to reach out to the person next to you. I'm not talking about a person who comes and says, I believe in Christianity or something like that. Even the person who's not religious. Reach out to them. Even the person in your synagogue, in your Beit Knesset, who comes in and they don't have a seat and you help find them a seat. Or the person who walks in and no one said hello to them. And you go over and say, Shabbat Shalom, welcome. Come to my home. You never know what that little action can do to save a life, to make a person feel welcome. And this is our obligation. And I hope that all of you will take on that mission and be inspired by us to realize that we can't do it. I'm going to end right now with one last word. We are not far from where the Holy Beit HaMikdash stood. Shlomo Melech, it says, when the Beit HaMikdash was built, it was unique architecture. I don't know if you're aware of this. The windows had a unique shape. They were wide on the outside and narrow on the inside. If you look at a fortress, if you've ever been to a fortress, they make it the other way around. Why? Because they were shaped so that the light and holiness of the temple should spread out to the world. That is our obligation, to spread the warmth and the holiness and spirituality that we have with another person. Thank you very much.
I know that there are many of you who have questions still. It is almost 9:20, and we wanted to keep this evening short enough because there are people who need to leave, who need to get home. And so Rabbi Kravitz and I will stay around. We also have the director of our Johannesburg office here. And we're here for you. If you have questions, we are more than happy to answer your questions. But at this time, we're going ahead and closing.
I just was remiss. I want to introduce Darren Seven, who is the executive director of the Union of Orthodox Synagogues in Johannesburg, and it's because of his driving force that there is a Jews for Judaism in South Africa. And I would be remiss to
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I hope to meet you each individually over the next however many years that we have here together. And like I said, we will answer your questions privately. You're welcome to.